Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spotlight with Scientists in School. Today, I am thrilled to be talking about electric vehicles and how they could possibly help us achieve a greener future. To do that, I have Cara Clairman. She is CEO and president of Plug and Drive. Now, Plug and Drive is a nonprofit organization that's committed to accelerating the adoption of electric vehicles. It's a fascinating conversation. Let's head on over and meet Cara and find out how electric vehicles could help us achieve a greener future. Hey, Cara, thanks so much for joining me. I am so excited to learn about electric cars today and how they're going to shape our future. Thanks for being here.
Oh, well, I'm so pleased to be here, Betty. Thanks for having me.
So, first, a little bit about you. You were an environmental lawyer who now is the president and CEO of Plug and Drive. I got to say, I love that name. Um,
Thank you.
how did that happen? What made you decide to do
Uh,
this switch?
wow. Well, I've been working in the environmental area really my whole career. So as you say, I started as an environmental lawyer and then I went in-house, which a lot of lawyers do, to Ontario Power Generation, where I worked as their environmental lawyer.
Right.
I started doing some work on a project while I was still at OPG, and that little project became Plug and Drive, and eventually took it outside of OPG to run it as a separate nonprofit.
Let's talk a little bit more about Plug and Drive. I'm going to take it back a little bit. I'm thinking most of the cars on the road today are with gasoline, right?
Of
Correct?
course.
Okay. So a kid was watching this and he's thinking, okay, mom or dad, get in the car. Oh, we need gas. So they go to the pump. Mom or dad
Right.
puts the pump in the car and they put gasoline in there and then they drive away. And sometimes nobody ever really thinks about it. So we're going to think about it for a bit. Where does that
Sure.
gasoline come from? And
Sure.
why do we want to get away from gasoline?
Sure. So, I mean, as I think you know, and probably everyone is convinced now that climate change is a huge problem, and burning fossil fuels is one of the key, not the only, but one of the key
Right.
contributors to global warming or climate change. And so worldwide, there's an effort to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and gas in cars and trucks is one of the biggest. And in fact, in Canada-wide, it's the second largest source of emissions,
Mm,
transportation. And here in Ontario, it's number one, actually.
wow.
And so we really can't hit our climate goals if we don't tackle transportation. And transportation is actually one of the easier ones to tackle. If you think about industry or buildings, it's a lot harder to get those off of fossil fuels. Whereas an individual car, when we have this amazing solution, the electric car, it's really just a swap. It's not a huge life change, right? So this is something that people can do. And in fact, it's probably the biggest thing an individual could do in their life to reduce their personal carbon footprint. The only thing bigger that you could do would be to give up a car altogether,
Right.
or to never set foot on a plane.
Oh,
And
that might be tough for a lot of
which,
people.
let's face it, most of us are not willing to do.
Right.
So the switch of the car is huge. Here in Ontario, you would drop your greenhouse gas emissions from your transportation by about 90%. So it's
Wow.
it's massive.
Okay, so now instead of a car that runs on gasoline, we want a car that you charge it with electricity.
Right.
Why is that greener? Like, why is that a better choice?
Okay.
Where does electricity
Sure.
come from?
I'll just use Ontario since that's where I am as an
Okay,
example.
sure.
But in most places, it's an environmental benefit to switch to electricity. Our electricity here in Ontario is mostly nuclear and hydroelectric water power. That makes up about 80% of our electricity together, nuclear and hydro. And so that's greenhouse gas, essentially greenhouse gas free. Then we have about another 9 or 10% of renewables. That's like wind, solar, biomass. And then about 10% remaining, that is natural gas. So that is fossil fuel. But if you look at our whole grid, only 10% fossil fuels, that's where that 90% emission reduction comes from.
Right.
And if you think of some other provinces in Canada, for example, British Columbia, Manitoba, Quebec, they're basically all hydroelectric. And even in Alberta and Saskatchewan, where they still do run coal-fired plants,
Ah, that's what I
you
was going to
still get
ask you.
about a 30% emission reduction because, of course, the grid isn't all coal.
Right.
And large plants are actually more efficient than a small little gas engine. So in the big picture, it's still an improvement, not as much of an improvement as you get in the non-coal provinces, but still an improvement.
So if we need a car that runs on a battery, we need to charge it, and we don't want electric vehicles to be, something just for the population of people that perhaps, let's say, have a garage, so they can just plug it into their garage, right? We want this to be accessible to everyone.
So, as you mentioned, most people love to be able to charge their vehicle overnight at home.
Right.
It's the most convenient. It's the cheapest because here in Ontario, for example, we have like time of use pricing where it's the
Yes.
cheapest at night. And lowest emitting too, because fossil fuel almost never runs on the grid at night. So for all those reasons, we want to be able to charge at night. Now, if you live in a single family home, that's a super easy thing to do. You can
Right.
even charge your electric vehicle on a 110 outlet, a regular old plug that you would normally charge your phone or plug your hairdryer into. It's a normal outlet. All the electric cars on the market can be plugged into that kind of plug. And so very easy. And then, of course, many of us will choose to plug them into a level 2 charger, which is a little bit faster. Think dryer plug. It's something like that. If you live in an apartment or condo, or, there's neighborhoods in Toronto where you don't have a parking spot in front of your house, even if you have a house, it's a little bit harder. So there are some condos and apartments where you can plug in the garage, but there's some where you can't. And so then you would be relying on public charging. And so you were asking, where are we at? I have to tell you, if you live urban, suburban, it's pretty good.
Right.
And you can look on the map. Of course, there's an app for that.
Of course.
There's a map. It's called PlugShare, and there's also one called Charge Hub. And you can look and see all the chargers. There are thousands and thousands of chargers out there. So, like I said, if you're an urban, suburban type commuter, it's actually quite easy. Does get a little trickier the further remote you go. So you
Mhm.
have to look on the map and see, okay, let's say I'm making a trip from Toronto to Thunder Bay or Thunder Bay to Winnipeg, or, you got to look and see, like, is it doable? I would say those areas sort of north of the Muskokas, it does get a little more sparse. So you really have to check it.
Since we're talking about batteries, can you comment a little bit about the environmental impact of disposing of
Yes,
the battery or the procurement of
sure.
materials?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about it in two parts because
Okay.
this is a really important issue, and there's legitimacy to the concerns that people have, right, about this. So it does take more energy to make an electric car than to
Yeah.
make a gas car. And so when people say the carbon footprint of an electric car is more than a gas car, that's true just in the manufacturing.
Okay.
But most of the emissions come from the driving, not from the manufacturing. So when you look at the cradle to grave carbon emissions, an EV will win out every time. It's much, much lower emitting. So that's the first point.
Right. So you got to look
The
at the
second
lifetime of
point,
the car, right?
right, you have to look at the full life.
Right.
The second question about disposal,
Mm.
it's a really good point. Now, these batteries are extremely, extremely valuable. They are not going into any landfill site.
Oh, I
These
didn't know that.
materials are wanted and needed. There's two uses. So there's something that we call reuse or refurbishment, where these batteries get put into a secondary use. Maybe they're down like to 80, 75% of their charge. Maybe not perfect for driving a car anymore, but still have a lot of use in them. They will go into a secondary use, like a backup storage, or used for a building, or for a backing up a charging station or something like that. And then they will be recycled. And there are companies right here in Toronto that are leading on this, and they tell us that about 85 to 95% of the battery can be reused or recycled, and including the lithium and the
Mm.
different metals, and that there's nobody who's thinking about tossing these into some landfill site. Very, very valuable. So, in fact, it's going to reduce the footprint because as we get further on in this, a lot of us will have our batteries made from that reused lithium and reused metal. And so that will reduce the carbon footprint of the car even more.
As we're talking about batteries, I'm also thinking about the battery in my cell phone.
Mm.
That when it's cold, sometimes it doesn't work.
Mm.
I'm trying to think, is this the same for the car battery in a car?
So it is a similar battery, lithium ion battery. And
Okay,
so this problem of disposal and what to do is actually a bigger, much bigger problem than just the car.
right.
But on the point that you make, it is similar, but because it's in a car and it's much larger than the battery you would have in your phone, it has a system around it called thermal management. And so it's basically a much better protected battery.
Okay.
And so I've been driving an electric car for 12 years. I've never had my car not start in the cold weather, and I don't have a garage. What you will see, though, and to be, that's not perfect,
Right.
what you will see is a reduction in range because batteries are not as
Of course.
efficient in the
Hmm.
cold. And so you will see a drop in range. But hey, when most of the cars now have 400, even 500 or 600 kilometers of range, if you lose 100 on a given day, does it matter for you?
Right.
And that's why it's important to think about what do I actually do day to day?
Right.
How far am I going? And the stats tell us 80% of Canadians drive 50 kilometers or less a day.
Hmm.
And so for most of us, that range is not a significant issue.
How many cars in Canada are EVs on the road today?
Well, it's interesting because I actually just looked that up.
Oh,
At the end of 2023, there were 400,000 electric cars on the road. In the new car sales, we're selling about 1 in 7, 1 in 8 new car sales
mm,
are electric. So it's growing. They still make up only a small percentage of the cars on the road.
right.
But every year, more and more. So, for example, in British Columbia and Quebec, the new car sales is over 20%
Oh,
electric
wow.
in both of those provinces. So they're really passing that tipping point.
So you mentioned a percentage, 20%. That sounds great. But I read that Norway, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
91.5% of car
Yeah.
sales are EVs. That's
Yes.
incredible.
So it's not a mystery. What they did is instead of putting an incentive on the electric car, they put a disincentive on the gas car. They put a very significant tax
Ah,
on the gas car, and so the EV actually
I see.
comes out cheaper on a sticker price. Now, here in Canada, the sticker price of an EV is still a little bit more than a gas car, but it's so much cheaper to drive
Right.
because electricity is about 1/5 or 1/6 the price of gas. So if you're paying $1.50 a liter, I'm paying 28 cents.
That's a
28
big
cents.
difference. That's a big difference. Well, Kara, I want you to tell me if this is true. The goal is in 2050 to have 100% of vehicles sold be EVs. Is that really
It's
Canada's goal?
actually it's actually 2035.
2035. That's
Yeah.
really close.
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible? And what do we
It's
have to do
it's
to make it?
ambitious. It's ambitious. I think it is doable. I mean, I think what's important is to think, okay, we're in a climate emergency, so we have to do all we can, whether we precisely hit that or we don't hit that.
Right.
We're heading in the right direction, and that's what matters. And I think each time somebody is thinking of a new car, we want to catch them at that moment because we know that if they don't choose it this time, it's usually about 7 more years before
Oh,
they're going to be
right.
looking again. And we really don't want to lose people for 7 years. That's a long time when it
Right.
comes to climate change. We see what's happening now.
Right. Right.
So I think it's really important. I hope people will just look at it for their life and see if it's feasible for them. And most of us who don't drive that far in a day, it totally is.
Wow. Okay, 2035. I thought it was 2050, and I thought, okay,
No,
maybe that's doable.
net
So that is
zero, I
ambitious.
think, for the whole country, net zero by 2050, which is a much bigger,
Okay,
bolder goal.
right. What if I want to test drive a car? Like, I really like what I'm hearing, but I actually want to get in there. What can I do?
Well, you're in luck because plug and drive, that's what we're all about. We're here to educate the consumer on the benefits of electric cars, and we have vehicles available to test drive with no pressure to buy anything, and it's free. We have a test drive center at Yonge and Bloor, and check our events calendar because we have events all across the province and beyond over, from April to November. And so there's plenty of opportunities to test drive an EV and see if it will fit into your life.
All right, so let's head out.
Can I just say this is the coolest spotlight interview I've ever done? I love it.
Awesome.
Okay, so before we get started, I'm going to ask you how many models of electric cars do I have to choose from?
Okay, so I think you're going to be really surprised.
Okay.
How many? Why don't you make a guess?
I don't know. I can't see there being more than 20 on the market.
Well, actually, there's more than 50
Wow.
makes and models of EV available today in
Wow.
Canada. And by the end of 2024, the end of next year, there's going to be more than 100. So
Okay.
every brand, every body type, and many brands have multiple cars.
Okay, so that's exciting. It's funny, it doesn't make noise. It's not-
Right, it's so quiet. That's
They're
one of the
very
amazing
quiet.
things about EVs.
I'm liking this.
You can really hear your music and you don't have to hear the sound of an engine. So you'll feel that this car has amazing pickup. Left.
Oh, sorry, you said left. So I was going out onto the road.
Yeah, let's stay in this area. So you should give it a try once we pass through the stop sign. Well, I want you to just sort of accelerate the car. Really give it a little acceleration and you can feel how quick.
Yes.
This car, if you need to pass on the highway or you need to make a quick acceleration, this car is fantastic. And actually all EVs are very quick off the line because instant torque.
Well, it feels good. And electric cars need less maintenance.
Way less. So I can tell you that EVs on average have about 30 moving parts and gas cars can have as many as 2,000. And so you can just imagine so many fewer things to fix. So just as an example, no muffler, no transmission, no oil change, no nothing.
Right.
The only things really are swapping your tires. If you live in Canada, you're still doing the winter, summer tire swap.
Right.
And brakes. And of course, if you use your regen braking properly, your brakes should last longer as well.
Electric cars have a low cost of ownership, true or false?
That is true. As we talked about, much cheaper to fuel. So you're going to save, if you drive the Canadian average, which is about 20,000 kilometers a year, you're going to easily save more than $2,000 a year.
That's some pretty good savings. What about electric cars are more expensive to buy?
That is true. Electric cars typically, if you compare them to the equivalent, which is hard to find, you're probably going to pay a premium of $5,000 to $10,000. But like I said, you're going to save it over time, and there's a $5,000 rebate on from the federal government. We have actually a really cool tool on our website called Find Your EV Match, and you can enter in all the stats of your current gas car. Every gas car on the market is loaded in there, and so you can enter your gas car and then how far you drive, and then you can compare it to any EV on the market, and it will make a nice little graph for you of all your savings every month.
Do electric batteries need to be replaced?
Typically, no. All the data is showing that the battery will outlast the car. And if you happen to get a lemon, which I guess, can happen, the warranties are excellent on the batteries. And so, before you choose your car, check the warranty.
Electric cars go a long way to reduce emissions that cause climate change?
This is the real reason I got into, promoting electric cars. Look, we all know our activities, especially transportation, are big emission sources. In fact, transportation is the largest emitting sector here in Ontario. And so we actually can't tackle our climate goals if we don't do something about transportation. And right now, EVs are like next to just not having a car, which of course is better for the environment. But after that, the very best thing you can do is switch a gas car for an electric car.
And the most important question of the day, do you drive an electric car?
Of course I do. I have this very car we're driving in. I have a Chevy Bolt and I absolutely love it.
That's awesome. Cara, thank you so much. This truly has been the most fun interview I've ever had.
I'm so glad. It's so nice. And not only were you a great interviewer, but an actual potential consumer. Yes. I hope we've turned your mind to think about an EV for your next car.
I think you have. Thanks so much.